What's up, guys? Long time no see, and more importantly, happy 2026! Man, I gotta say, it definitely feels a bit different in front of a camera now, having gone through a semester of college, but as many of you could probably guess at this point, I am not about to give up any opportunity I have to catch up with you guys here. Because on top of my previous mention in my channel update video that I still have a list of a select few videos I'd like to make, today's video is going to combine both my knack for narrative storytelling and my long-standing passion for this channel itself to bring to you my long-anticipated ranking of every year I have done YouTube. So just as a quick disclaimer, I will mention that this ranking itself will likely be a bit more on the informal side overall, but to make things a little more interesting at the same time, we're also going to be looking at and reviewing some other elements to tie into the rankings, a couple categories for which I listed as the specific trick shots I ended up scoring, particular skills I came to learn along the way, or even connections I had made within the trick shot community. And another thing I'll just quickly add in is the fact that these rankings are intended to be largely independent of my personal life, because while I'm not planning to fully leave out my stories to share, I do feel that at least, say, avoiding their overtake, if you will, in this video will help the video concept itself have the greatest accuracy. But anyways, besides all that, today we have 7 long years to rank in total, so without further ado, let's just jump right into the video. So to start off at number 7, or what I consider to be the worst year of my YouTube experience, we have 2022. And to be honest, this is really the only year I actually consider a bad year among channels like my own, because I basically attribute its placement on this list almost solely to the fact that it was essentially a transition year in the trick shot community. However, just that reasoning on its own is far from enough to fully explain 2022's case, because not only did we have the introduction of the notorious YouTube Shorts that would almost immediately take over the internet and only become a further juggernaut of a format in the following years, but I also can't help but mention that with this change came one of the biggest hits I've ever seen, and hope I will ever see, to a trick shot community. Because starting with my personal favorite trick shooter from that time, I can name almost 15 to 20 different channels that were driven away from YouTube in just 2022 alone, a large part of which I actually speculate to be from the introduction of the shorts. And I don't mean to say that this format meant bad things for other rising trick shot channels at the time, but for channels like my own that had stuck around after posting for several years prior, it just seemed to become really common to see huge drops in attention just from continuing our original format. And while all this was happening, another thing I'll mention is that since this was the first time I considered my channel to be struggling since my posting of flip trick shots from 1 to 100, I could almost feel a weight being directly put onto my shoulders to make my videos better, which, even with the fact that this seemed like one of my better years of trick shots, ultimately led me to feel really stressed out as I put in the effort to make my new content. And with the fact that the impact of this change is still visible on my channel to this day, I just remain really dissatisfied with how 2022 treated not only my own channel, but the original trick shot community overall as well. So anyways, now to move on to at least a slightly better year, at least in terms of YouTube, we have 2025. Now I will say I did have a hard time ranking this last year this incredibly low considering how great the last 2 years have been for me in general, but my main knock on 2025, at least on the YouTube side of things, stems just from the fact that it was a pretty overcrowded year. Because on top of the obvious case of my senior year and first semester of college taking up my time to film, I was honestly planning out trick shots at such a high level of creativity by this point that most of the shots I tried wouldn't even work at all, leading me to the first time frame of my channel in which I either downgraded or fully scratched nearly as many shots as I actually scored. Then on top of this, the shorts trick shot community I hinted at earlier had begun to evolve so rapidly that I could hardly even tell what had been happening, which is I guess why you could say I paid very little attention to what was trending when deciding to post my own shorts. And with the fact that I tend to be a very strong creature of habit and had previously built basically an entire empire of dice stacking shorts, I feel that while they did indeed represent what I tend to specialize in, the shorts I would come to post throughout 2025 would quickly become really repetitive. And seeing how this choice would gradually lead to a continuous downward spiral in my channel's retention, I see it as for this specific reason that besides 2022, 2025 would be the year I clearly felt the most disconnected with the trick shot community, without even really factoring in the busyness of my own life. Yet, even knowing I was still able to post at all during a time I was being admitted to a business honors academy, graduating with honors from high school, and building what I see as lifelong relationships, I am ultimately perfectly satisfied with 2025. Alright everyone, so now to move on to the part of the list where I've really started to struggle ranking each year just because of how good each one has been, we have 2020 in the number 5 spot. And I know what some of you all may be thinking, like, why the heck is COVID now considered a good year? Well, let me answer that question for you in just 3 words. Time to film. Because it's something that was literally non-existent to me in the year we just covered. 2020 was almost the entire opposite of 2025 in regards to how I spent my time, and the only reason I don't rank it any higher is because outside of just 2 particular instances, my channel's growth was also next to 0 during this time. But outside of that, I truly can't deny that as a 7th grader in love with trick shots at the time, the year of the lockdowns was actually pretty fun. Because on top of the fact that this was the time in which I really started to work on improving my editing, this particular time frame was early enough in my YouTube career, I guess, that my channel's popularity wasn't a driving factor towards how I would feel as I was making my content, and that the popularity itself was on a much smaller scale overall. And basically what I mean by this is that coming straight out of the year I created my channel, I specifically remember being more than excited to gain just a couple subscribers at a time, meaning that during the lockdowns, seeing just that was often all I needed to motivate me to foster my creative skills and use the time I was given with isolation to create videos I would eventually look back on with pride. And outside of the increasingly creative trick shots I've been making, I also can't help but mention that the look of YouTube itself in 2020 was, in my opinion, the best it ever looked as a platform. Because even today, as random as it may seem, I cannot deny that I badly miss anything from the blue like button, to the red subscribe button, to even the sharp-edged video displays that YouTube once offered, serving to illustrate just yet another reason why I remain so nostalgic for a time like 2020. Okay guys, so now right smack in the middle of this list, we have 2024 at number 4. And while I did expect 2024 to come with a little more popularity right after finally mastering the YouTube Shorts algorithm, what would actually come as the flip side to this would turn out to be so much more transformative than I previously thought. Because noting that this is easily the year that I tend to talk about most on the personal side, the primary takeaway is that 2024 marks the year I really started to mature, not only in real life, but also as a trick shooter, which at the time was largely attributable to my recognition that my long-standing goal of monetizing my channel, as sad as it was, simply wasn't gonna happen. And basically right after this, instead of letting that stupidly specific thought take over my mind, I instead began to move from an attention-seeking creator to more of an efficiency-seeking creator, which, noting the fact that by this point I kind of saw my channel as just a library of memories, tended to combine with a growing sense of also being thankful for the story I was working to build. Because by the way I look back on it now, 2024 was also the year I began to realize just how great of a high school experience I had actually been having, because as much as those around me may have seen my hobby of doing YouTube as a bit of a strange one, not only did they respect my ability to actually take it seriously alongside my academics, but many were also perfectly willing to accept me just for who I was as a result. And seeing how this was basically a direct testament to the life lesson that just being yourself is the best way to immerse yourself in a community, I would become so thankful for this that as a heavy introvert since all the way back in junior high, I would finally develop the motivation I needed to make attempts to foster relationships with my peers. And overall, keeping my motivation for trick shots plenty high in the process, this would truly lead me to find my perfect balance of building outside connections and doing YouTube, which despite leading me to sacrifice time and make noticeably fewer trick shots than in years past, would also mark the first time I was functioning as somewhat of a scheduled content creator. Because with the list of videos up on the screen now, I had finally made it a priority to lay down the foundation for how I intended to continue my YouTube story, that of which balanced the time with my peers with the proper timing for what would eventually become some of my greatest personal achievements throughout my channel's history. And whether it be my one-arm pull-up, my first 5-mile run as part of a cross-country team, my first 2-minute breath hold, or even my personal favorite of 5-ball juggling, it is beyond clear that while 2024 may not have been my most productive year for trick shots, I am well beyond satisfied with the practical life advice it has offered to me on top of my YouTube experience. Alright guys, so quick intermission just before we move on to the top 3 of this video. I just want to remind you all quick that somewhat as I said at the start of this video, just because I am now in college does not mean I'm planning to fully stop uploads on this channel, and even as of right now have plans to make 2 or maybe even 3 more over the course of this summer. So I just wanted to say feel free to subscribe or even stay subscribed if you don't mind a bit of a wait, and also feel free to drop down any other video ideas you have for me to make down in the comments. But anyways, besides that quick update, I really hope you all are enjoying this video, and right now let's get back to the montage. Alright, so at number 3, the first top 3 year on this list, we have 2019, or as many of you may know, the year I officially began to run my channel. And as literally just an innocent 12-year-old trick shooter all those years ago, I just have to admit that while this year was certainly far from my most professional in terms of performance, there may not be another year of my life that I could become as nostalgic for as 2019. Because for those of you that have actually watched my content from all the way back in 2019 and 2020, you'll notice that this was the time in which my friends clearly showed up the most in my videos, and while I won't say that flying as a solo creator the last few years of my channel has made it feel like less worth my time, I guess, I will say that some of my strongest memories from this channel would certainly come from this time frame as opposed to a more recent one. And another thing I'll mention that actually ties really well into this is that since I wasn't really all that far into my trick shooting career, I felt that at the time, I could realistically make the shots I wanted to make without any real competition or overlap with shots I had previously made, which, despite leading me to put forth quantity over quality from time to time, would really kind of serve as what specifically welcomed me into the trick shot community. And as I mentioned early on, this would quickly become one of the things I'm most grateful for as I look back on these times, because not only could I actively rely on this community to laugh off the most funny and embarrassing moments of my videos and celebrate the most legendary ones with all my friends and I, but it was also just this group in general that would constantly have my back for support as I adjusted to YouTube. Being constantly there for me in the comments to give helpful tips with things like my video editing, trick shot suggestions, video ideas, and really everything else in between, I have come to realize that I really had it all in 2019, and even today would give up a good fortune just to go back and relive it one more time. Alright everyone, so now as we move on to the top 2 years I've done YouTube, taking the silver medal is going to be 2023. And honestly, if it weren't for like the last 2 months of the year for a reason I'll get to later, there's honestly a really good chance that 2023 would be at number 1 on this list. Because as the story goes, after coming out of 2022 with such little confidence in the future growth of my channel, it suddenly seemed as if all the stars would align for my channel to finally bounce back from the state it was in, which all started with my first major comeback to something that's referred to as trend jacking. Now, I'm not going to go too in-depth towards why this actually was, but to explain what I mean just a little bit more, roughly around the turn of the 2023 year marked the introduction of the first trend since the level 1 to 100 videos in which I saw an active opportunity to grow my audience, which with it being a dice stacking trend, I'm sure you all and I both knew at the time that I would certainly not be missing this opportunity. And although the trend was pretty short-lived and largely faded out by the middle of January, not only had I produced enough of the shorts that I'd begun to see overwhelmingly positive results, but also that I can honestly say, for the first time ever, that I'd actually developed motivation to film dice stacking specifically in the shorts format, which would quickly lead to 2 different notable things. First is the subsequent resurfacing of the point stacks in under 1 second trend from a couple years back, which after I'd seen several other creators take on in late 2022, I had basically no choice but to bring back myself upon seeing renewed potential for the trend in 2023. And second, upon seeing the success that came alongside bringing back this trend, I was honestly to the point where I thought that dice stacking had basically become a guarantee for attention, which is precisely what would lead me to post this iconic short that, although I had no idea when I was starting at the time, would end up becoming the first episode of a second self-created trend that would come to earn me over 5,000 subscribers over the course of over 300 episodes over the course of almost 3 entire years now. And what I find even more amazing than this is the fact that everything I just mentioned all happened in the span of barely a month, which aside from being exactly what I wanted for my channel, would build my confidence to a point that would set the tone for 2023 to become easily my most successful year of YouTube. Because being guided by a trend whose outreach would exceed my expectations literally almost 90% of the time, I would naturally find it exponentially easier to keep my motivation high during this time, which would even spill over into my creation of full-length videos for an experience that not only yielded some of my best trick shots, but even kept me comfortable with the transition to a fast-paced upload schedule as I made my attempt to adjust to the shorts community. And noting that with this transition naturally came more opportunities to interact with my new fans, my only major knock on 2023 would stem from a YouTube update in October that year that, without me even knowing it for a short time, would end up blocking any and all comments I received on my channel from my view, which seemed to take effect until just the end of the year for some reason. And sadly, despite the issue being of such a complex nature that I'm not even really going to try to explain it to you guys, it quickly became evident to me that it really seemed to kill a lot of the momentum I managed to build throughout the year, which, as I look back on the thriving state of my content at the time, whether it be the process of learning to juggle 4 balls, participating in that year's World Trick Shot collab, or even finalizing what would eventually become my second most viewed video behind flip trick shots, has seemed to make the issue all the more unfortunate since it truly felt like the missing piece to a perfect year. But to ultimately reflect on 2023 as a whole, I cannot deny that as one of the most revolutionary years I've gone through performance-wise, it has been more than worth my time for the lessons I learned. Okay everyone, we have officially made it here at number 1, taking home the gold medal for the absolute best year I have done YouTube, drumroll please, is 2021. And guys, I'm just gonna admit right now that I literally have so many good things to say about this year that it's hard for me to even find a good place to start. But first, I think I'll just mention that 2021 was my first major year of genuinely creative trick shots. And while I'm not meaning to say I hadn't necessarily made any creative trick shots prior to this year, why I specifically look back on it this way is because by this point towards the middle of my YouTube career, I'd basically established myself as a distinct content creator in the OG community, yet would also be constantly looking for innovative ways to perform new trick shots and preserve the status I'd earned and cherished. And another thing I'll point out is that unlike in 2022 when the shorts took over, the system of YouTube in 2021 just seemed to do a much better job of rewarding creators' hard work with strong results, which aside from being a thought that I genuinely think any trick shooter from that time could agree on, would lead me to combine my constant creative efforts with the community inspiration I was offered to ultimately make some of my most memorable trick shots to this day, 2 of which I even consider to make the top 3 of my all-time best list. And aside from the valuable community interactions that I'll touch on in just a bit that came alongside this, adding further onto this claim is the fact that I felt like 2021 was my first full year with decent editing, which in my opinion would combine with both the nostalgia and memorability of the shots I made to produce some of my favorite videos I've ever put on my channel. Because whether it be one of my iconic marker flipping videos, my first and honestly hilarious recreating video, or even one of my several challenge submissions, not only would I have no hesitation to go back and rewatch these myself any day of the week, but I also feel that with regard to how these videos were made, it was really easy to tell just how much I'd been immersed in the trick shot community as I made my content. And to best illustrate this point, I'm actually going to point out the example of my recreating video, whose primary purpose, as opposed to solely gaining attention for my channel, instead aimed to primarily pay forth my gratitude to other channels in the OG community, which really stemmed from a variety of different reasons along the lines of their support to me as a new trick shooter. And now having come to realize that 2021 would basically be the last strong year in that community, I have grown so undeniably thankful not only to have made that video specifically, but many others like it from the same year that simply reflect my glory days with those other creators. And to top off all of this, I also can't forget that 2021 would mark the final year I was able to freely pursue YouTube, which whether it be stemming from the fact that this was the last year I didn't have a summer job, the last year I wouldn't be bogged down with a high school course load, or even the last year that my friend B the Beast would run his channel, would all feed into why both my friends and I were able to take such good advantage of this year. And as I look back on it now, ultimately brought full circle with the fact that this was easily my most fun year, I fail to see how any year in the future could possibly top my 2021 experience. Alright everyone, so that is going to be a wrap for this video, so I thank you all so much for sticking around, and while this video did turn out to be a bit longer than I thought, I will be planning to bring back this style of video at least at some point in the future, and would really appreciate any feedback you guys can give to me. And another thing I'll mention is that aside from your guys' opinions on this video specifically, I would also love for you guys to tag me with any updates that may come to the community in the future, because while my college life has made it really difficult for me to keep up with it, I would still like to make a genuine attempt to stay in contact with what's happening to better gauge my audience. But anyways, without me getting any further off track than I already am, I just want to thank you all again for watching, make sure to like and sub, and then I'll also hope to see you all again in just a few months. Later.